All right, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for spending your evening here with us and with Fleisher Memorial. So just want to let you know what we are doing. So Fleisher from a Distance, the Wind Challenge edition is a special program designed to showcase Wind Challenge artists through the years. The Fleisher Challenge was founded in 1978 as a platform for local artists to exhibit. This effort was later generously supported by Dina and Jerry Wynn through the Wynn Foundation, bringing the Wynn Challenge to the forefront of exhibitions in Philadelphia. Now, this important exhibition is supported by the Dina Wynn Art Foundation, and I invite you to find out more by visiting dinawynnfoundation.art, and I will put that in the chat so you can visit at your leisure. Tonight, tonight's artist is Elizabeth Hamilton, which you might know or might not know. She was selected for the 2013 Wind Challenge. And just so you know, the Wind Challenge, it takes place every year, and every year 6 to 9 local artists are selected to exhibit in our galleries. It's one of the most prestigious exhibitions in Philadelphia, and Elizabeth did it back in 2013. And Elizabeth, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me. And
Doing
hello,
good.
everyone.
I'm very happy to have you here tonight. But before we get started, I just wanted to ask you, how was it in 2013, the Wind Challenge for you? Can you share with me a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah, it was really great because there's not a lot of opportunities for emerging artists to just kind of get a stipend and experiment. There was no proposal you had to give to get that exhibit. You just submitted your existing work, and then they chose you based on what you could have already done. So getting that kind of chance as an artist to get a stipend and then to just get some freedom to make stuff was great. And I actually asked permission to install something outside, which I thought they'll definitely say no to that. And then they just said, oh, I guess that's fine. And there was like no permit discussions, no logistic discussions. And that was just really thrilling to be able to get that kind of permission from an organization. So yeah, it was a great opportunity.
And I think I read that you're from Massachusetts. Is that correct?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, and you moved to Philly to go to school, or? Yeah.
Well, actually, I think the audience is like everyone I can see, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it was equal parts, as many of you know, school and my now husband, Ryan, I met in college, and then he's from Philadelphia. So I wanted to move to Philadelphia for the art opportunities, but he was also living here. So it was a nice little blend of options.
And here you are.
Yeah.
Still Philly. That's awesome. Anyway, before we continue, I could ask you 5 million questions, but I know you have a presentation, so I'm gonna give it to you. Take it away.
Oh yeah, so here, I'm gonna share my screen, and then if you guys have any questions, you're welcome to just unmute and like come on and ask if there's anything you would like clarification on, or if you have any criticisms, they're always accepted. So join in anytime. Let's do share screen, and let's do.
If you're too shy, you can put it in the chat. I'm happy to ask it for you. So.
All right. So even though I feel confident, you guys can see the PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I figured I'd just kind of talk a little bit about an overview of my practice. And I want to start out by just saying that generally I don't worry too much about how I identify as a maker. I know some people are sculptors or painters or photographers, and I just kind of use materials as they work for my concept or how they're relevant to what I'm trying to express. So I think I make mostly sculpture now, but I kind of rotate between, you'll see like a lot of different kind of mediums just for conceptual convenience. And I'm not too concerned with what that label is, but that wasn't always the case. So I think it's always fun with an artist talk to pop back to like the old work that's bad. So I'm gonna start there. This was the stuff that was happening early in grad school when I thought I had to be a painter, because I thought you're an artist and artists grow up to be painters and that's what I should do. So I was working on these canvases and everything was just kind of unsuccessful and not fun to look at. And I finally had a critique with Kate Moran, who is a local Philadelphia sculptor, who was like, you just got to get off the wall and just like go any place but the wall. And I was like, oh my God, what does that mean? She was like, just like go on the floor. So like processing that kind of feedback was really helpful. And then what I had been working on, you can kind of see in this little image here, there's like some pillowcases, and this is like an aerial view of the street where I grew up on and the graveyard that was near where I lived. So I grew up outside Boston, and my mother died when I was like 6 months old. And then I was raised by my grandparents. And then my grandmother died when I was 12. My grandfather died when I was 16. And they're all buried in this one little plot that's super close to where I grew up. I could walk to that house, or that plot rather. And when I moved to Philadelphia, I couldn't go there anymore. And I was kind of realizing that I was really like missing that ability, like that ability just to go there, walk there, be in the cemetery. Because my mother died when I was so young, we were at the cemetery like all the time. Like most weekends, we were over there trying to make it look nicer. And it was a very factual thing. Like Jeannie was her name and she died. And we talked about her very openly, not like emotionally, but just like the factual parts of it. And then I was also trying to process at that point, even though it had been so long ago, like my mother's death was very factual and it really informed like my worldview. But then my grandmother's death was like earth shattering. That one, like I feel like I just couldn't, I never talked to anyone about it. My family wasn't built for emotional discussions. And I think because my grandmother was alive, we talked openly about my mother's death, but when she died, like no one in the household could really talk about it in any kind of healthy context. So I was off at grad school trying to kind of process stuff, and I was grabbing every time I went home, I'd grab more things. So at one point I grabbed all of her bed sheets that were still in the house, because like my dad never threw anything out. It was my dad, my brother, and I. My brother was older, so the house was empty, just had my dad in it, and he had like everything there from when I grew up. So I would grab all these bed sheets and I took them home, or I took them to Philadelphia rather. And then I just was kind of enjoying them because they're just these like vintage floral bed sheets. They were so precious and I love them so much. And I've been trying to use them in paintings, like clearly unsuccessfully. So when my critic was like, well, just go on the floor, I decided just to burn them and then make a little pile of them on the floor. So I took all the bed sheets that I had of hers, which felt very precious. And I wanted to try and like almost mimic like a crematory experience, but also think about how there were these like large things and they became so small. So this image of like the tape is the outline of a full size bed. And that's all, you know, like that's all that was left after all those sheets were burned. So that piece is not really successful in of itself, but it was a really big breaking point for me as far as thinking about my work differently and getting off the wall and just like freeing up what kind of materials I'd work with. So that was a pretty breakthrough piece that I had thanks to Kate Moran. If you've known, if you, I like, I know Elaine knows Philadelphia artists. If you know Kate Moran, she always looks like you, like she's so disappointed in everything you do. And she'd walk into your studio and she'd be like, so is this it? And you'd be like, oh God, yes. But this one, she actually gave me like a small smile for. It was very satisfying. And that's just a close up of the ashes. So then I was, the mattresses and the bedding, I've always kind of liked that it feels very human in shape. Like it feels like a door, it feels like a portal. I've kind of gone back to that object and shape a few times. I was kind of playing around with it in grad school, just trying to think about it in different ways. But ultimately, I was thinking about this phrase, like everything must go. So I was thinking about not necessarily the negativity of it, but just like the idea that everything eventually must go. The good and the bad just kind of keep cycling through. And it kind of became like a mantra and almost just like a reassuring like gift, like everything eventually will go. So I made this little mock-up where I put a light behind some drywall and I carved through the drywall to try and get it to be illuminated because I felt like it should have this like kind of otherworldly presence. And I love the neon work of different sculptors like Bruce Nauman, but I couldn't afford neon lights, or I can't afford to make like the bulbs into letters. That's a really expensive process. I don't even know how that would work. But this was just so cheap. It was just incredibly laborious. So this Everything Must Go was just the final actual version. And it has lights that were mounted to a wall. And then I built a faux wall on top of it where I carved through the letters. And that was kind of the beginning of my grad school thesis, which I just want to touch on briefly because it was another point where I felt like I had an important breakthrough. Grad school was great because it was just a time to really think about my work. And even though I had jobs and everything, it was just people were talking to you about your work all the time. So that just really forwards your ideas so quickly. But one other thing I had from home and that I loved dearly was my grandfather's car. So after he passed away, my brother drove it. And then when my brother was older and got his own car, I was allowed to have the 1991 Fleetwood Brougham. And it was just this beautiful, beautiful car. But it was 91. So when I was in grad school, that was 2011 or 12. So it was pretty old at that point, and it was having some issues. It kept breaking down. I drove it home one time and it didn't start up to drive back, so I had to take the train back to Philadelphia. And then I was like so scared my dad was just going to junk it, because he would do that kind of stuff. If it could like turn a quick like a little bit of money, he would just kind of junk stuff. So I went back home and I insisted on it getting back to Philadelphia. And I couldn't explain why. Just like, I needed it for my graduate school project. My dad was like, okay, well, school's real, so I guess I'll help you get it back to Philadelphia, because he thought it was like a wasted effort to just even keep the car running. But this is a photograph of the drive back. So like my then boyfriend, Ryan, he drove me up to Philadelphia. My dad and Ryan and I drove the car down to Philadelphia. It broke down like 3 times on the way there. It was so stressful. But like that car to me was always just like my grandfather incarnate. When my grandmother died, it was just, like I said, shattering. It was just, I couldn't ever get over that. My grandfather's death didn't strike me the same way. It was obviously incredibly upsetting, and he had a long battle with cancer, but it's just like, I always felt less unstable about that one. But I realized when I couldn't get to the car, because I always had his car, when I couldn't get to the car, I started feeling very like anxious about all I had emotionally tied up in that car. So I decided I wanted to use it for a project. I wasn't exactly sure how, but I was thinking about that everything must go mantra. And I was also thinking about the end of year exhibition at PAFA, which is the school I went to for graduate school. And they had this like crazy end of year show. They had a preview opening where all the graduates would come in and sit next to their work. And it felt like a used car show. We had to stand next to your work and try and sell it. And people would tell you like, this is your one night to make back your tuition money, because people will come and buy work. And there's a lot of pressure. And it felt like just an incredibly insane event. So I decided I wanted to make a sculpture of my car in front of the Everything Must Go sign, and kind of play off that used car feeling, but also kind of play off of the idea of like a funeral setup, because I very much like the aesthetic of the Catholic funerals that I'm familiar with, where you have like the casket and you have like signs behind everything. So this is just carving the letters. It was super dirty and painstaking, but again, like so cheap, which was really important when I was in grad school. And this is just a view of my studio space of how everything was kind of nuts. The other lucky thing that happened to me was that I had a good friend whose dad was a mechanic, and he had I lived at 24th and Parish. And at 27th and Parish, he had an auto mechanic shop, and he let me go in there and work on my car sculpture. So I didn't know how to make a large sculpture. I hadn't done that before. And I kept trying different things that weren't super successful. But eventually I landed on covering the car in saran wrap, and then taking big burlap sheets and dipping them in plaster, and then covering the car in plaster, because then I could make an internal wooden skeleton to put those on. And it was very laborious. And I also kind of like things that are laborious, because it just feels like I can connect to the object a little bit more that way. So this is a view of the building of it. It was very messy. They were so polite to let me do this in their space. And I know their customers were constantly like, why is this happening here? It was a month of doing this before the show opened. And then I also didn't know how to build anything with wood, because I'd never done that before. So luckily some very nice graduate students showed me how to use a drill and showed me how to use the saws at the school, and then build up the internal skeleton. And then it looked so clean when it was getting assembled. It was just one giant chaotic mess. But this was one clean installation shot of my friend Rachel trying to give me some moral support. And then that's what it looked like when it was installed. So inside, it's a little bit hard to see from this view, but there's 2 panels of silk flowers. And that was the first time I'd used those, and I've kind of gone back to them a lot since then. But essentially with this kind of sculpture, it was really important to me, because before this I'd been very wrapped up in craft and like making things look really good. And I had this very narrow definition of what good was. And with this one, I wasn't so concerned about creating a perfect illusion of a car, or creating something that was like high in craftsmanship. I was mostly concerned about getting an honesty of materials. So essentially to say that I wanted to look like it was trying. I wanted the object to look like it was barely together. I wanted the stress of it to be visible. because I kind of felt like that was all tied into this idea of it. Almost to me felt like a casket. That's kind of how I viewed the sculpture a little bit. And then this is some other views of it. And here you can kind of see the silk flowers inside of it. So, you know, the ASC was great. That's called the Annual Student Exhibition. Sorry for that acronym, but that's what the PAFA end of year show is called. It was awesome. Like, people were selling work left and right. And of course, no one was at all interested in this because it doesn't go above a couch and it can't go in a bathroom. And I was just like, well, whatever, like, I'm proud of it. It means a lot to me. And I knew it wasn't going to sell. So I priced it at the Kelley Blue Book value, which was like $1,200, which I'm not sure how familiar you are with art prices, but quite frankly, in the art market of the student exhibition, that was like a steal, because like things were selling for $10,000. It was like disgusting how much things sell for. So I had the Kelley Blue Book value, and then I was lucky enough to win an award at the end of the show. And that gave me $400 so I could actually get a U-Haul truck and a storage unit. And I was like, well, even though this is all about letting things go, I actually can't let anything go. So I put it in a storage unit because I couldn't bear the thought of like just scrapping it. And then I was incredibly lucky that the West Collection bought it. They had seen it in the show. They didn't buy it during the show. They bought it after the show, which meant that the school also didn't take any commission from it. And I'm sure also they were like, this is pocket change for us. So they bought that whole piece, which was so exciting. They didn't buy the wall behind it. They bought the car. There was two different pieces. And then it's kind of a long story I won't get into, but another museum wanted to show the car, and I didn't know how to ask the West Collection to let me have it back, and that felt awkward, and I get awkward easily. So I thought I'll just make another car. Like I'd rather just make a whole nother one than have to get into an awkward email request. So that's what I did. I made another one for another art show, and then when that art show was done, I knew I kind of had always wanted to try and put the car outside. I'd wanted to try and do an outdoor installation that always been so enticing to me in grad school, and I could never like do a successful one. And I had a studio in North Philadelphia on Orm Street called the Paper Mill, is in that building. And Lehigh Ave was right around the corner. And Lehigh Ave just always had a ton of like open parking spots, no cart, like no meters. And you know, unfortunately, there was a lot of junk on the side of the road. You can actually see there's a sign in the back saying junk cars, like the number you can call. So I thought, well, I'll put it here for a little while. And I asked Strathman's, they're like a little appliance and construction business. I asked them if I could put it in front of their business, and they were like, I guess, just like come back and get it. So I put it up there, and as we were installing it, these like neighborhood kids came over and talked to us, and they were really fun, and they were like, what is this? And the whole thing is on casters, so you can push it around. So actually it could roll down the street. And they were like, well, what's going to happen to it? And I was like, well, we're going to put it up for a couple days and then come back and then like properly remove it. They're like, oh, so can we like play with it? And I was like, yeah, go for it. Like, that sounds fine. So then the next day I went back to check on it, and it was gone. And I thought, oh no, like, where did it go? And my friend, or my husband's a police officer in Philly, and one of his police officer coworkers was driving around the neighborhood and found it like on Emerald Street. So I went to Emerald Street the next day, and it wasn't there anymore. The tires were there, but the car wasn't there. And then the cops saw it a different night, the next night, in a new location. So it was getting pushed around the neighborhood. I don't know who was doing that. I really hope it wasn't people frustrated with this giant, like now maybe unrecognizable sculpture. I could never find it. I found the tires. I could never find the car. So unfortunately, that was a learning experience, because I realized I can't just put an artwork on the street without like a really proper plan, because someone had to end up dealing with that. That wasn't me. But I hope the kids had fun with it, because they had to push it 3 blocks to get to Emerald Street. So they at least had some fun with it. I'm not sure how they did that safely. But anyway, so that was a really great opportunity for me to like bring work outside and have it fully accessible. And that was a goal of mine. And that was another really important moment as far as like my practice. But then let's see, it's 6:52. Let me just pop through, because this ends at 7. Let me just pop through a couple others. So these are some things I did at my dad's house and installations. I did a balloon piece, which is like hold like 1 balloon for every day from when my grandmother gets sick to when she passed away, because I felt like holding my breath. But I really like the idea of taking objects and having them like vacation as art objects, but not have to live as art. Like I was so concerned about all that waste I'd made with the car and how I didn't know where it went, that I decided just to make some things that would be, you know, not permanently art objects. It was a relief as far as sustainability went. This one was a little tough because the blankets were hard to unsew after I did this. I covered my dad's house in blankets like a shroud. And that was also not super well planned because I took 2 days off of work to do it. I took the train up to Philadelphia with a couple blankets I already had, and like took all the blankets from inside his house and put them, and I put them like sewed together in the driveway because there wasn't enough room to do it. And it was a little more unwieldy. And then I had to call in sick like for 3 days in a row because I wasn't done. I couldn't get another time to do it. And I had one of those like crappy jobs at the art museum where like nothing's important. So I just kept calling out sick until this was finally done. But that was another one where I really was happy to do something outside. Sorry, I never said these are all the lamps from inside my dad's house. I put outside for 24 hours like a beacon, but that's where those lamps are from. But let me just kind of scooch ahead to, this is the Fleisher show. That was a wonderful experience. This was an experience with smell, where I wanted to work with soap. But I kind of want to talk about the flower theme that happens in a lot of my works, because I have this piece was an installation at the Abington Art Center, and they're all like flower cutouts that were put into living grass. So over the 3-month exhibition, the flowers stayed the same and the grass went to yellow and died. And obviously with my focus on death, I really kind of loved that evolving contrast. But with the flower magazines, I really love the idea of just like saving every flower you come across to give to someone. And that was kind of where that idea came from. But then the flowers, I just love how we use them in our culture for like, we use them for celebrations, we use them for funerals, we use them for cheesy decorations around our house. I love all versions of flowers, but I especially love the silk ones, the fake ones, and the photographs, which are just so far removed from the original thing. Like there's no good smell, there's no good sensual texture to them. And there's also just like the beauty of how fragile and temporary they are is totally lost, because they're going to live forever as a photograph. So I do love flowers. And for that reason, I did my first little collaborative piece with the community. And this one I'm really proud of and would like to kind of evolve into another iteration. But essentially what I did was I asked all these different communities that were like grieving communities. There were like grieving groups for just children who had a death in their family, and then people who had lived through miscarriages and stillbirths. I just found different groups that were grieving and asked them to design a flower. And then whatever design they made, I would make out of plaster. And I covered it in this photoluminescent powder that then glowed at night. And I don't have the glow in at night photo, but I made a whole little garden of these based off these different designs. And people would tell me little stories about, like, they could tell me, they could draw their design. Some people just wrote words like, I want a flower with 5 petals because, you know, 5 was an important number to their loved one. But that piece was really great because making those felt like a really great way to connect with people. And then I had this exhibited as part of this InLight exhibition at the Virginia Museum of Art. So it's all light-based works. So it was a very gentle piece because it would glow in the dark, but didn't have a light source really. So it wasn't as powerful as some of the other pieces that it was next to, but I actually want to find a location in Philadelphia where I can do this because it was, it just was such a great way to connect with people. So anyway, that's a little bit the flower thing, but the flowers keep coming. And ever since I had my son, the work has had to kind of scale down. So this is a photographic installation. I took all those little cut flowers from Abington, from that little show, and I put them in a field and photographed them. And I just have, honestly, like hundreds of cut flowers. So I've made them into a collage too, because honestly, like working with 2 little kids at home and full-time job is a little limiting. So until my kids are older and like using the bathroom on their own and feeding themselves and not waking up all night, the work's going to have to just be a little bit more something that can be manageable. So collage, I can just go in and out as I need to. And this piece I did during the pandemic because it was all, every magazine we got, I cut out a piece of the sky that I could find. Every time I found a piece of sky in the magazines, I would cut them out, or like the junk mail or whatever. Because that was kind of a nice way to, like, I was home with my new baby for the pandemic, and that was a gift, but it was also a little isolating. So like thinking of like the blue skies that lived everywhere was kind of refreshing. And then in the last minute, I'd like to share with you my paper plates. I worked at the art museum, as I said, in a very low-level job that had little meaning. And at one point I was working in conservation, dusting and cleaning the most expensive art in the city. It was a very first world concern to dust a painting with a $500 brush. But I really love the European Decorative Arts collection. I love their plates, and they reminded me of this little set my grandmother had of like these little floral tea sets. It was like the only little thing she had that was like pretty plates, and we weren't allowed to use them. So I just have kept noticing every time I see a floral collection plate at the PMA, I would either photograph it in person or I go on their website and just do a snap of it, and I would just recreate it as a paper plate because it's super affordable that way. And I like the idea of how it plays on like the ownership of like what part of it do I get to own now. And this is just a reference of like the original on the right and then mine. And this is the newest one that was finished like a week ago. So that's my artist talk. And you are all very sweet for coming after work when you all have all these other things going on. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Yeah, before you go, what are the plates? I know they're paper plates. Is it watercolor that you're using for these?
It's watercolor and then acrylic. So if you see like the gold paint is acrylic, and then on some of them they have like the blue paint is acrylic because it's a nice opaque color, but all the centers are usually just watercolor.
Wow.
Which I had never played around with before. That's why I put this first one here. This is so terrible. It's just a sad little watercolor painting, but this was the first one I did. And it was a nice little like interesting thing I wanted to keep trying. And then they got a little bit better as I progressed. Because I got a little bit better with watercolor. And I like to use the class pack watercolors because I already have them from school where I teach art. So like this whole setup is just like you walk in, you can paint for 10 minutes, someone cries, you can leave the studio. Like you don't even have to wash the brushes because watercolor won't make your brushes harden. So the convenience of it is unreal. That's kind of what's been so alluring about it in these past few months.
And can you go back to your dad's home when you cover your dad's home with the blankets?
Yeah, my dad was hilarious for that one because he struggles with a lot of things, but he is always up for some random art project, despite the fact that he'll still ask me how my paintings are coming. He knows like I haven't painted in at least 10 years now. I mean, the plates he doesn't know I do, but I told him, I was like, listen, I just want to quickly sew all these together and then cover them with the house. He's like, well, let me go find a harness, was his first response. Not like, why not? I don't think that's a good idea. He's like, well, let me go find a harness, and it's probably going to rain. You got to do it before it rains because I'll make them really heavy. And he was right. It rained right after I got this shot, and it was so heavy getting them down. It was so unsafe.
And what was the reaction of the people walking or driving by? Did you get any?
He doesn't live on a very busy street, but my neighbors, like a few of them did drive by, and it was just, very passive, like, oh, how's it going? What's going on? And what you doing there? And I was like, oh, I'm covering the house in some blankets, waiting for a follow-up. And I don't know if they just didn't care, or if they were just like, oh, that's nice. Literally no one was like, why? But my dad's house, it's hard to see here. He doesn't keep it up that well. It's a lot of work for him. He's in his 80s now. So I also could just see, like, he's had junk in his yard before. I could see if they were just like, oh, it's just Mr. Hamilton's house. And that's just the randomness of what it's like there.
And also the lamps. I actually love that piece. I don't know. There's something about this piece that's so intimate. And the fact that were those your dad's lamps, all of them?
So this is every lamp that could have been removed from my house, like of my dad's house. So there was like one ceiling lamp that couldn't come out, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
This is another one. Like I took the train to go home, and I knew I wanted to get this piece in, and I knew that I didn't have a lot of time when I was home. So I was like, as soon as I get home, I was like, we got to get the lamps out, and I got to get like a twilight photo before it gets super dark. And he just like picks up a lamp. He's like, what are we doing with the lamps? Where do you want them? Not like he's good about that stuff. He wasn't like, oh, let's catch up. How are you? He doesn't ever ask, how are you? And in these instances, it's really helpful because he just like jumps right into action.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's fun.
Oops.
So yeah.
I wanted to talk to you about like one thing that I really love was like that your instructor said off the wall that you needed to get off the wall, and I think that's such a powerful right there, like for you especially, it seems like because you completely like reacted to that. I mean, you went for it.
Yeah, I mean, that was a helpful criticism. That was the best part of grad school, was having a critic who would just like look at your work and then think deeply about it and then like give you some feedback.
And so the first piece that you did of the wall was it the mattress
It was
or
the ashes.
the ashes? That was the very first one. Okay. And the rectangle meant to be the bed. Is that why you did that shape in the?
Yeah, because I had the ashes and I was trying to think like they just look like a pile of ashes. They couldn't see what they were referencing. So putting the size of the mattress around them kind of felt like they were then referencing the boundary of like what the object had been. Like the absence felt a little more explained.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then as I was trying to study your work, I realized that um, you, it's not that you don't care, and I should not say that, but the permanence of our work. You're okay with things becoming a memory almost.
Yeah, I mean, I've never tried to make a living off my art, so I've never been um and I think that's great when people do that, but I've never had that as my mission. So I think for that reason, I've always been more at ease when things will go away because I don't have to store them. I don't have to worry about like the plaster pieces I did love, but like the environmental impact of just like now I have a bunch of plaster covered burlap and like it's not harmful, but it's gonna take forever to like it just like what do I do with it? So the idea that things are temporary is actually super helpful for me. It puts me at a lot of ease when I make stuff. And that's why I also don't mind the paper plates because they're like practically recyclable. They just have a little bit of acrylic paint on them.
And please, anyone, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question too. So I don't want to be the one asking all the questions. Now, when also, I need to say this. So when I was Googling you, trying to find out more about your work and stuff like that, something happened that there were many Elizabeth Hamiltons out there. And
Really? I haven't Googled
so,
myself in a while.
some of them were very famous from way back. I don't know if you know this. One of them was married to Mr. Hamilton, the one they wrote the play about. Another one was an artist from Massachusetts as well,
Oh,
who used to
I didn't
paint,
know her name was Elizabeth.
who used to paint flowers. I don't know if you know. Did you ever? I just
No,
because
I'll have to look into that.
okay, I'll send that to you because it was fascinating because after seeing your work and seeing all the flowers, and then I find this other artist, Elizabeth Hamilton, that also painted flowers back in Massachusetts, and I think it was around 1871 or something like that.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that because honestly, the flowers, like they start with this kind of, again, like a funeral reference because like my first experience of a lot of flowers was looking at photographs of my mother's funeral. Like there was a lot of photographs that we had, and she just had flowers for like days in the funeral home. And then when my grandmother died, I saw like they were like in the same funeral home and they were just all there. And my grandmother was a good gardener. I am trying to learn how to garden, but I am not super strong with it. So the idea that um, I love the like the fakeness of the flowers that I tend to use, like the silk flowers, the reproductions of the flowers. Um, but it's interesting that there's an artist with my name who's also painting flowers. I'll
Well, I
definitely
think
look into
she
that.
died in the 60s, I think, but yeah, I'm not sure if she was from Boston or not, but she was around there, and she painted flowers. And again, I never heard of her, but she seemed like it was someone I'd like to research more and
Yeah,
find out more about
because
it. And then I was just wondering, maybe she's related to you,
yeah,
somehow.
no. My dad made a painting that he's very proud of, and he tells me it's a bridge in Boston. He tells me about. He shows it to me periodically, and he reminds me that he did it often. And he'll tell me that's he's like, well, yeah, this is probably why you like the art because I did this painting, and and I actually do think he has. I wouldn't tell him this, but I do think he has a good argument in that, like his method of moving through life has been a lot of how I've modeled my art making around because the way he just like right now his living room is just a wood shop because he lives alone and like why not have a saw on the middle of your living room over a carpet? Like that's a perfect location to do that with. Um, and I think if I ever lived alone, God help me, I'd probably find myself in a similar arrangement. But like the way he just kind of is open to things and the way he just kind of is like, oh, let's just try it. Like I think I have confidence in that because I've seen him move through life like that. And I have also noticed that even though like so much of my work has been about grief, I kind of wondered if becoming a mom would change that. And so far it hasn't. But I do wonder, like I feel like my work looks a little more joyful. I'm not sure if the origins are more joyful. Um, I don't know. I have wondered that like how like if I'll because I feel like I can't arbitrarily get myself out of that mindset and like make myself make something about joy because that doesn't feel super authentic. But I do have so much joy in motherhood. So I wonder if that'll eventually come into play in a different way. I've been trying to wonder about that for a while.
Which brings me to, did you have an aha moment where you decided to be like, I want to be an artist? I mean, was there a moment that you?
Uh, you know what? It sounds so cheesy and typical, but it's true that I always loved to draw when I was growing up, and I got attention for it, and I had a talent for it. So I got a lot of eyes on me for that. And then I just remember thinking like, well, I just want to draw all day. And I remember someone told me, my dad, I think was like, because my grandparents didn't go to college. My dad went to like night school. And then I was trying to ask him like what college was. He's like, well, college is where you practice what you're going to do all day for a job. And I was like, oh, so I could just get a job as an artist and I can go to college and just make art all day. And he was a computer programmer back then. So yeah, his college was really just practicing what he would do for work all day, but that's not how college is for most people. It's not practice for your job. But I remember thinking like, oh, one day I'll be able to go to college and I'll be able to like practice being an artist and I'll be able to be an artist. And it was just kind of always the thing I thought I would go into. And then when I went to grad school, I was very naive because I went to grad school to like get better at art. And I didn't realize people go there to like network and build connections and make a career. Because I never, again, even though I wanted to make art, I never thought I would have a full-time career where that was my income source. But in some ways, I think that's kind of freeing because I've never been worried about selling work and worrying about like making something that fits what just sold. Although I'm like not opposed to selling work, but it's just I think maybe that has helped me free up what I do.
I love your honesty, and I think I have a love-hate relationship with education. I think that people do need education. Education should be free for everyone. At the
Mhm.
same time, I think that sometimes it becomes silly.
Yeah. I mean, like I thought grad school was I mean, I'm so thankful I got to go because just having all that time and having all those eyes on your like once you graduate art school, like no one cares what you do. No one's like, "Oh, I got to see your work. Let me get in there on Friday. I got to get 40 minutes of your studio." Cuz like I mean, maybe for some people that's the case, but not certainly not in my experience. So in grad school it was like, "Oh, people get in your studio all the time and you're always in there." And this is kind of like even though as I said like I had other jobs that was like my home base. That was where I was dedicating most of my efforts. So just having that time to work really does it gave me a lot of opportunities kind of further and further an idea. So that's the one thing now that I find I struggle with because even though I can carve out time to make stuff, I'm not getting those like hours upon hours to meditate on something. But I did read a quote once that like something about along the lines of like making art at your kitchen table is never going to get you anywhere. And I do disagree with that strongly because I think that's discriminatory. I think some of us, you know, we make art because it's what we feel authentic is to us. And if I'm not allowed to make art like in my one home studio and sometimes also at my kitchen table in the 10 minutes I have here and there, then like I wouldn't be able to make it at all. So I do think the benefits of immersion you can't argue, but I wouldn't say without that you can't still make meaningful stuff.
I so agree with you, and thank you for saying that out loud because I think a lot of people don't think that way. But you can do art anywhere you want, and
Because there's that idea, right, that like, oh, you should have a studio space and you like
right.
and like a lot of artists who I know are successful make money in other channels like through real estate. They just don't talk about it, but it feels like they have a successful art career. But then it feels like, oh, if you don't do that, then like, or if you don't have a certain kind of job, maybe you're not like a real artist. So I mean, I teach art to high school kids, and I love that because it's so interesting to see what they do and like where their minds are at. Um,
I bet that really grounds you because it grounds me for sure. You know, especially when someone tells you, I can do art, and I feel like everyone can do art. Everyone can try
yeah.
it. You know.
No, they're a lot of fun. I actually I should probably share with them a little more what I do, because I don't ever talk about my own practice with them a whole lot. And like, I didn't even tell them personal stuff about my life. I didn't even tell my first class that I was married with children. And they were horrified when they found out. I feel like I gotta find ways to share that with them a little bit more. But I love sharing other things. I love talking about their work and where they get their ideas from. And I love giving them a direction and seeing like where they take it. Cause sometimes I'm like, I never thought that would go in that direction. So I love the creativity that exposes me to. And sometimes like their laziness is really efficient at doing something as well. Like sometimes they have really good methods for cutting corners you can steal from.
And let me ask you about your last show. I know you just had one. And what did you exhibit in that show?
Oh, so I just showed at Gross McLeaf, which is in Center City in Philadelphia. And I had, let's see, I actually had this collage of the flowers up because it was called Bouquet for the spring. And then it was these two pieces, and one other one that's not pictured here. So yeah, so that was, I think the paper plates have been exhibited at a few other places, but that was their most recent one. They've been exhibited at Woodmere Museum and at Abington.
And how are you exhibiting the place? You're not exhibiting it with a photograph, are you?
No, so I take the actual, actually I have it here. This one doesn't have the hook on the back, but what I put is just like a D hook on the back, which my good friend Carrie Freno suggested. And then this hangs on the wall. And I have heard there's a wax you can put over watercolor to kind of seal it, which I need to test out and look into, because these are just like, someone bought one from Gross McLeaf, which I think is awesome and exciting. But she said she wanted to put it in her kitchen, and I don't know what that means. Like if it's going to be behind glass, if like oil could splatter on it. I used to work at an art gallery and people would constantly buy artwork for their bathroom. And I was like, oh God, the moisture level's gonna ruin it. Like that's a bad place for it. So I feel like if I'm gonna put them up for sale, I probably need to have a, because right now it's just so delicate.
You need a disclaimer.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very clear what it's made out of. And I told the gallery it is not sealed under anything. So again, they're a great gallery, so I know it was communicated, but I never intended on selling them because I think they look good as a group, and I've always wanted to make like 30 and exhibit all 30 of them. So I've actually never been, I haven't been trying to sell them. I've been trying to like build up enough to have an exhibit of just those pieces. But anyway,
I actually had that same experience where people like, I'm gonna put the artwork in the bathroom, and I'm like, no, don't do that.
How fancy are those bathrooms? I hear that all the time. I used to work in galleries before I went to grad school in Boston, back like before 2008, when it was just like easy to sell anything. And I would hear that all the time. Like, I think it should go in the bathroom. And I don't understand. I mean, my bathroom doesn't have any art.
I just thinking of paper and like you're saying, humidity and all this stuff, and what's gonna do to it.
Yeah, the works on paper I was always so concerned about. And I would tell them like, you got to watch the humidity level. But I mean, it's theirs to do what they want.
It's theirs, exactly. Why are we to say what they can or cannot do with their work? So
yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Yes, thank you. This was wonderful, Elizabeth. I loved hearing about your work, and I have actually two questions. The first is, so these plates are like, and the flowers are bright and beautiful, and was that at all connected, like timing wise, with when you became a mom, like the colors?
You know,
I used the flower piece,
2019. Yeah. So I started them when I was after Calvin. Calvin was born in 2016, so it was after Calvin was born. And that, yeah, they are very bright. They're like the brightness has really upticked. I feel like a lot of my work was in the blues and the greens and the more muted tones, and then like they did uptick.
No, I was just curious.
Motherhood joy seeping in.
Well, that's what you're saying with the joy piece. I was wondering. And then my other question is about the flowers that you did the installation, or the work that you've done with the different like grief groups, I guess you're saying. And how is that when you're working on those projects with these groups, with like, how is that? Like you're talking about your art in terms of like, you're very eloquently speaking about, some of the inspiration for your pieces. But when you're working with these people who are experiencing grief of their own, like what is that? How does, like, are they open to the conversation? Like, how does it go? Like, is it?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Like,
because it's a really sensitive, it's a sensitive place to walk into and to insert yourself. And also because I was inserting myself for like an end goal project that I thought they would benefit from, certainly, but like it had, it had a goal. So what I did was I first worked with the Center for Grieving Children in Philadelphia because I reached out to them and I loved their mission. And they said, you can come, and they're very protective of their clients, as they should be. Mm-hmm. They said, if you want to work with our clients, like, we like the idea, we're open to it, but you have to come to a training session for a weekend and like learn how we talk and how we talk about death and how we talk about grieving. Because there's, certain things we don't want said in front of them. Like, we don't want, like, they work really hard to talk about death in very concrete terms and not fluff around it, and like to be open, have honest dialogue. So they want to make sure anyone working with their clients, respects that method. So it was really helpful training. And I wasn't so sure what to expect. Like, I wasn't so sure what a group, I try to ask, like, what does it look like when you have your groups meet? And they said, it can go all different ways, but we do often have art making events. So when I showed up, I didn't give like an artist talk. I just kind of showed up and I said, this is who I am, and this is the project, and this is some images of what it might look like, and this is what we can do today. And if you want to join and participate, you can make a flower and I'll walk you through it. And because like for the Center for Grieving Children, I just went there with the supplies and they made their own flower. And that was like the beauty of working with them, is I could go there with all the supplies and they could just, play around with it, make something. And those are really special. And I just showed them how to do it. And then they just kind of talked to, like, they would show up with their family. It was usually the child and a couple of adults in their life, and sometimes siblings. And they just all kind of played with the supplies. We would have casual conversations. We'd talk. I'd ask them who they made their flower for. And some people wanted to talk about it. Some people didn't. And, that was all, like, the range is obviously whatever their comfort level was. But the training certainly helped, because I think as someone who's been through grief, I feel so strongly that grief should be discussed in a public format, and that it's often so isolating. So I feel like it really is something that unifies and divides us. But I'm not good at talking about grief. I told you how my dad is and my brother, and we just don't talk about anything emotional wise. So I'm not necessarily equipped to talk about this from a healthy standpoint. So having their training was so great. And then after I did that training, I knew I was going to exhibit the work in Richmond, Virginia, and I couldn't go down there to do workshops. So I reached out to groups and I said, I'd love to offer a way for your groups to participate. So if they're open to it, they could design a flower, send me the design, and then I'll create it. So I had like a little part of my website where they could upload the image, they could email it to me, they could mail it back. So that was, hands off. I never got to meet most of those people. But they wrote me some really sweet notes, and a lot of them who sent the images via email would then just share stories about their loved one, which is just so touching and such a gift to read. And then when I went down there for the exhibition, a lot of them actually did come out to try and see it. And that was really great, because they would I was worried they'd be like, oh, that's not what I designed. Or they would go from the artistic, technical standpoint, and they didn't. They were just like kind of excited to see like a part of their loved one on a display. Someone who's lost people, keeping that person alive in any way, I've always found so heartening and so comforting. So I think maybe they came at it from that point of view, although I didn't talk to all of them about it. But that was a really helpful way to learn how to work with a group that, like, they have one mission, and I was kind of allowed to be a part of it for just a little while. And I would love to be able to do that again.
If you were to do it again, would you do it exactly the same way, or would you have a different approach to it?
And honestly, it depends on how much I can get to the people. Because if I can't get to the people, I think I'd do something similar where I might, now that there's Zoom, I don't know if people would just want to throw the computer out when the pandemic's over. But like, it is nice to be able to have a live chat with people, even if I don't guide them through the art making process. But I think in some ways, like, making it was a nice connection. I think doing a workshop for a group I would do anytime, because I like offering people art making experiences, and working with the Center for Grieving Children was great because they got to have a very unique experience of making their art, and I like providing that. I think if I was to make this into another installation, the connection that I would want to have with it, I don't know, I feel like it could go either way. Like, either hosting workshops, people could make their own thing, or doing something where it's like, me trying to create what they did, because there was a nice connection with that.
All right, there's one piece that you just went through it very quickly, which is
Sorry. That's because I thought this ended at 7 and I panicked, and I realized it didn't end at 7 after I did that. I'm so sorry. I was like, oh my God, why am I taking so long? Then I realized I hadn't taken that long.
It's the structure outside of Fleisher that
Oh,
you
yes.
built. And I thought that maybe it looked, no, but it doesn't. Now I thought maybe it looked like your dad's house, but it doesn't. I just saw that picture.
You know what though? We used to have a blue door growing up.
Okay.
So the door was painted green when I was like bored one day in high school and thought I could like redecorate the house, and it was a bad idea because it wasn't outdoor paint. But we used to have a blue door growing up. So to actually like the white siding and the shingles, it actually was meant as like a reference to the house I remember growing up from, and like the little silk flowers that sat in the front of it. So like with that piece, I wanted to do something outside because I like the idea of having art that isn't behind a door. So that was partly why I wanted to have the house outside, but I also kind of liked it as like a grave marker in a way, that I felt like this was marking the inside exhibit, and then the inside to me kind of I don't know why, because it doesn't totally look like it, but it was built out rooms on casters so it could move around. This was when I was working in conservation at the art museum, so I really loved the museum aesthetic of like hyper presented and very clean looking. And the pieces that are on exhibit there were all part of the series I do where I broke a bunch of pieces of china and repaired them in ways that made them unusable. Because I kind of always love that idea of like whatever doesn't kill you slowly, or whatever doesn't kill you all at once kills you slowly. I've always abided by that idea. I don't think it is as negative as I think it sounds more negative than it is. I don't think that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think that if you break a bone, it's always going to be weaker. But I do think like those scars that you live with can really, build you up, and they can inform your worldview in an important way. So that was a little bit about those pieces. That's a close-up of them.
And the way you repair the pieces, was that already predetermined or just dependent on the piece?
It was dependent on the piece, because it was some of them, and I was also trying to experiment. This was like an early grouping of work. I was trying to play around and see like what the options were. So I'd break them and repair them. Like sometimes I'd make a mold and pour them with cement or plaster. Sometimes I'd repair them with cloth or felt. And then that was also, I really always have loved China sets, as you can kind of tell. They were, these were never mine. These were always bought from a thrift store. But they are maybe also partly why I love the plates from the PMA so much.
Of course. And there was one more piece that you went through, which was the ball of yarn, maybe, I think it was.
Oh, yeah. So these pieces were a little bit about smell. So this one, I'll get to the ball of yarn, but this one, to start out with, my dad, who never throws anything out, like ever, he decided to move from his like little bedroom downstairs, which made sense, into the master bedroom where my grandparents had lived. And this was like 10 years after they died. So of course he should do that. But he like took everything in my grandmother's bureau and just threw it out and put his own stuff in there. And when I realized he did that, I was like heartbroken, because I'd always open those drawers and like smell her and like live through her stuff. And I was like, what do you mean you threw it out? Like you just threw it out? He was like, yeah, it was all old stuff. And I was like, you never throw anything out in this entire house. He has VHS tapes from the 1970s or 80s. So whatever, he threw it out. And then I took my own bureau and I took a bunch of black tea, which is the only thing I can think of that smells like my grandmother that I have access to, because she always drank tea. So I filled the bottom drawer with black tea. And then when you open that top drawer, you can smell it. And I call this one Linger, because it's how I used to engage with like her furniture after she died. But that was kind of a whole series of like sleeplessness where I couldn't really sleep well at night, partly because this was the beginning of when Calvin was born. And I was thinking about sleeping and smells. And then at one point I just took pillowcases I had and unraveled them. And that was like a thing I could do while I was nursing. Because if you're ever nursing a baby, like you have, like 1 or 2 free hands, we have to kind of crock the kid's head in your arm. And if I have my phone on, like the light is distracting to the baby and the baby wants to look at the light. So this was something I could kind of sit there and work on as I was like up this nursing a baby like over, and he was like a constant nurser. So this was a piece I started soon after he was born of, it's like part of the whole series I've labeled as sleeplessness, because it kind of fell under that category. And oddly enough, like the one, this one, like someone bought that. I don't understand why. I was going to have a whole series of them. And it was again, like super flattering and great. But I thought like the pieces I sell that are sellable, like the photograph, like the lamps, those things that are like, it's in a frame, it goes on a wall, nothing ever happens. But these weird little things like the car and the yarn, and like there's another piece I made of all my husband's t-shirts. I don't have it here, but I missed him one time before we were living together and took all of his t-shirts with me when I left his apartment, and I put them in my studio and I stacked them up so I could smell them. And I put that on view one time in a gallery, and he was like, I need my t-shirts back, and I just bought him new ones. And someone bought a stack of t-shirts. Like, I don't understand. It's great. I don't understand it though.
The meaning behind them is so powerful, I think, that I really, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that because like that is how I feel like I can connect best. I don't think I've talked about my work a lot. So Katie, you said articulate, which I think is generous. But I think that my most strongest communication is often through the artwork I make. That's why I feel like I process my emotions best through this. So, and that would be a really great gesture if that is the motivation behind those.
Well, I think you're a true artist, and that's why people are buying your work. So
that's also, it's only 3 things. It's not like things are going out the door.
And it's been really amazing. Really, your work is superb, and you should be very proud. And really want you to continue doing more and talking to us as well. But anyone has any final questions before we end this talk?
I'd just like to thank you all again for coming. It's very nice to see you all.
Great to see you. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you. This was wonderful and really powerful to hear you, describe and explain the work you do. It's really beautiful work. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, in that case, I'm gonna say goodnight to everyone, and thank you again for coming. And there'll be another one next Monday, another artist. Any questions? I'm always here for you at Fleisher. And thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good night.